So I just got done watching Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, and it's not great. Not terrible, not amazing, but just mid, I guess. Ever since this show was announced, a wave of skepticism has been surrounding it. Then a little while later, the trailer came out and the hate was amplified to degrees I haven't seen for a show since this one. It basically got ratioed with around 56,000 likes to 159,000 dislikes, really quickly. And now the show has finished, and today I'm going to talk about what didn't work, what worked, and what they can improve on. But first things first, I just want to say, if you're clicking on this video hoping I'm going to slam dunk on the wokeness of this show and how wokeness has ruined Hollywood, you should probably watch someone else. I am a believer in diversity in what we watch, and if you're the kind of person who gets mad due to a female lead or seeing a person of color on screen, then this channel is not for you. Go watch Ben Shapiro or something. The first thing I want to mention is that I can understand why people are mad about this show. Tolkien's works are extremely intricate, and it takes someone who has a real love for the source material to adapt it well. And while perhaps not perfect in the eyes of the most die-hard Tolkien fans, the Lord of the Rings trilogy had the essence of Middle-earth down to a T. Every character, being, and piece of story meant something, and that's also a testament to Peter Jackson's exceptional filmmaking skills. Also, like many, I was first introduced to the Lord of the Rings through the films. It was some of the first few films I remember seeing as a child, so they hold a very special place in my heart. So for a giant corporation like Amazon to just come in and start making a show about this world seemed a little out of left field, and I get why people were hesitant. We were especially hesitant because this would be covering the Second Age of Arda, and we had only ever seen adaptations of the early parts of the Third Age and the later part of the Third Age with the War for the Ring. So this was territory that hasn't yet been covered, unless you read the Silmarillion, in which case this isn't new for you. Now, Amazon adapting the Second Age is an interesting idea, and I'll talk about how I feel about that decision later on in the video, but for now, let's stick to the show itself. I think the first thing that rubbed many, as well as myself, the wrong way about this show is that the show can be boring as f***. In my opinion, that's the worst thing any piece of media can be. Sure, if something is bad, then it's bad, but there are lots of movies or shows that are bad, but you can enjoy them because they have a personality or it's just crazy and enjoyable to watch. But when something isn't that good to begin with and it's boring, that makes it so much worse, and that's exactly what happened for the first few episodes of this show. It's boring! Oh my god, it's so f***ing boring. And I feel like they could have easily shortened the amount of episodes so it wasn't stretched out so much. Another thing that this show fails at is capturing the world and the personality of the elves, except for Elrond. It does a great job with the dwarves and the Harfoots, which I'll go over more later in things that I liked, but the elves aren't nearly as interesting as they should be, which is a big problem, especially if your show's two main protagonists are elves. Which brings us to Galadriel. Now, for many people, she's the biggest problem, and while I personally think that the show's biggest issues are rooted in how it's written and the age it's set in, I can understand where they're coming from. I think what's most frustrating for me is that she almost does have a compelling story, and when the actual plot does kick off, I think her character shines more. But once again, so much of the show is about characters in random situations at times. It doesn't help that Galadriel's motivations are rooted deep in the plot of the story, which is usually a great thing when it comes to writing. But when there's a severe lack of the plot moving forward, like there is in the first few episodes of the show, she kinda just stands there and does nothing. This issue of plot moving slowly also plagues the character of the stranger. Now, due to the many hints that were thrown at us in the finale episode, I think we all know who he really is. And I think the creators of this show knew that if they came right out with it, we would all have problems with a certain someone being in the Second Age when he's supposed to appear in the Third Age. So they created this story where he has some kind of veil in his mind, which inhibits him from knowing who or what he is. This didn't work for a multitude of reasons, but mostly because basically his entire character for the whole season and every single scene he was in was about who or what he was. And it's like, we get it. He's a mysterious and important figure. Can I just see him fight or do something actually important?
Shadow, you came. To Shadow I bid you return.
Oh, finally. That was awesome. But here we have the same issue for the stranger character as we do for Galadriel. And now, I'm not saying that stories that focus on character and how said character interacts with the world is bad or anything. In fact, personal character-driven stories are my favorite. However, when you have a premise this high scale, because it's, fucking Lord of the Rings, the plot is very important, and we need to see our characters involved with it, especially the elves and Istari. So yeah, this is something I really hope the second season works on better. Get these characters more actively involved with the world and the plot. Now, you probably think I hate this show, and while it's far from perfect, I did think that there were some decent things about it. For example, I didn't expect to like Elrond as much as I did. Although brilliantly played by Hugo Weaving in the Peter Jackson trilogy, he always felt somewhat removed in a way, and I was always left wanting to know more about him. And this show has given me that. Sure, he's still an elf of much wisdom, but the show does a great job in showing that he's young, and also that he's half human. We get to see how he shows more emotion and empathy towards people because of his human side, like when he interacts with Durin the Fourth. Also, all the dwarves in the show are amazing. They feel exactly how they should be. Tough with much bravado and charisma, but also sensitive and heartfelt when they need to be. Each dwarf, particularly Durin the Fourth, and his wife Disa are played brilliantly. I also greatly enjoy the Harfoots, and though their slower paced lifestyle did plague the stranger's character arc in some ways, I talked about that earlier, I enjoyed seeing how they interacted with the world of Middle-earth and their culture. We get how Sauron would underestimate these beings because they basically are like the mini Hunes of Middle-earth, but they hold a great amount of will and determination deep inside of them, and we know that this will be Sauron's undoing one day. The last few things I liked about this show was the cinematography. This show is shot beautifully. Every frame feels vibrant and alive. I haven't seen cinematography like this since Mr. Robot. Like, guys, it's that good. The final thing I liked about this show might be a hot take for some, but I like what they did with Halbrand, or Sauron, or whatever you want to call him. Now sure, was it obvious that he was going to be Sauron? Yes. Could they have subverted our expectations in a better way? Sure. However, I liked how they gave us a three-dimensional aspect of Tolkien's most famous villain. Now, Tolkien's villains such as Morgoth, Sauron, or even ones like Ungoliant are never really given much characterization beyond the fact that they're bad. Sure, the Silmarillion gives us ideas about what they thought or who they were, but I never felt deep inside their head, which I guess was the point, but in Rings of Power, I get to see Sauron in a different light. This is almost like his origin story for becoming the second Dark Lord, and it starts at the bottom, with him being betrayed by the very things he was governing, and the idea of him essentially giving up hope and his ambitions and dreams of ruling Middle-earth is very interesting. It's even better when Galadriel's emotional problem of not being able to let go of her past, her want for revenge, and her fear of Sauron actually drive him to believe in himself once again to go and achieve his goals. It's a great bit of dramatic irony. The reveal was also a great scene, and I like how lines from Galadriel's speech about how she could rule Middle-earth with the One Ring from Lord of the Rings were used by Sauron himself as he was trying to persuade Galadriel to be on his side. Unfortunately, what came after was disappointing. The forging of the rings were perhaps the biggest slap in the face lore-wise. Now, I can see them bending certain lore for the stories, such as Sauron teaching Celebrimbor and the other elves taking the course of several thousand years. Like, sure, that's not going to happen in the show, and I don't care too much that it was Halbrand and not Anatar that did it either, but the actual act of the forging of the three elvish rings felt extremely rushed and uneventful. Like, in lore, the rings are supposed to be a massive piece of history that forever changes Middle-earth and brings about so many things, but it feels so uneventful in the show. I feel like they could have easily waited another season to introduce the rings. Maybe have a situation where our main characters are at their breaking point and Halbrand brings up the idea of the rings to them. Hold off his reveal for a later date, but subtly hint to us, to the audience, of who he really is. I know I complained about how the plot felt stretched too far, and I still stand by that, but for this one, they could have waited a little bit longer. Not everything has to be solved within a season. So, that's pretty much all I have to say. Is the show the worst thing I've ever seen? No. Is it great? No. It's just mid. Now, I have had this idea of maybe doing a rewrite for the show, and if that's something you're all interested in, then let me know in the comments. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you all later.